Hey, what's going on, Ryan?
Hey, Christian. I think I gave you screen sharing capabilities, so let me know if you're running into trouble.
Yep, looks like we're good to go.
Cool.
Um, See that okay?
Yeah,
All right, good to go.
amazing. Have you been playing around with the new agent stuff from OpenAI?
A little bit, a little bit. I've got some projects I'm working on, so I haven't got to experiment as much as I want to. And then obviously with the DeepSeek stuff, that's also been there too. So I feel like I need a weekend of not working so I can do some fun work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What is the gist of the DeepSeek stuff? I'm seeing it everywhere. I haven't had time to really dig in. Is it just that they were able to train a model as powerful as OpenAI's with like less funding? Is that like the big to do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the two big pieces are one that they released it open source, right? So it brings the bar for open source much closer to state of the art, based off what's in the market currently. So that's the big, I would say from a developer standpoint, that's the big difference because somebody can replicate this research, somebody can go do this outside of, the Chinese infrastructure, outside of the DeepSeek lab and recreate this, and it'll happen
Hmm.
rather quickly if it isn't already out there now.
Wow.
So that means all open source models will have those capabilities. And so that's, obviously that causes a panic within the US market. And there's data privacy concerns, particularly with how many people are actually signing up for the app and using the paid service through them, which is
Mhm.
all goes back through a Chinese corporation and subject to Chinese law, data collection, so on and so forth. So there's some real risk and concerns there. But from a open source, hey, I can download this model, see the weights, be able to see what the code does, and then also see the paper and how they made it. The way they made it is largely just being way more efficient and focused in certain areas. So it's definitely right. So when I look at it, it means that a model that could run on your computer now could have reasoning capabilities here pretty soon.
Wow. Wow. Crazy. Yeah, I've been meaning to read up on it, but really have just been seeing people post about it, so haven't had a second to actually step away. Um,
Yeah.
cool. All
There's
right.
there's a lot of posts too, so you could just spend all day reading through those. But yeah, no, that's there's a lot of good debate out there, and good conversation right now. So I'm enjoying it.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll let people trickle in. Maybe we'll get started at like 2 minutes past the hour. Does that seem good?
Yeah, that works for me.
All right. I'll just let you run with it. I'm gonna mute and I'll start the recording when you start.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
All right, you want to kick this thing off, Brian?
Yeah, everybody at this point, if you're inside the community, you probably know who Christian is. He is definitely more of a guru on the technology side than many of us are. Pays close attention to a lot of the things that are happening on some of the AI developments, and uses a lot of the tools as a early adopter. And I often lean on him for advice on what tools to use and what not. But figured we could do some essentially monthly tech. We'll call it Tech Tuesdays for now because they're going to be happening on Tuesdays at the end of each month, where he can kind of do a deep dive into one or two tools. So this is the first of that, and I'm just going to hand it over to Christian, who's going to run away with ChatGPT's Teams tool, and then answer some questions, I guess, at the end for folks who have them. But excited, yeah, to introduce Christian and see how he uses ChatGPT Teams.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian, and welcome everybody. It looks like we've got a nice group. Good afternoon. I appreciate you taking time. Welcome to Hay Council's very first Tech Tuesday. As Brian said, my name's Christian. I'm the founding attorney of Coding Counsel, based out of Texas, and basically I spend most of my time helping attorneys today and other law firms figure out how to use this AI stuff. How do you use it safely? How do you incorporate it into your workflows? What are the both open source and proprietary options that are out there that may be something you need to consider? That's kind of the world I've been living in for the last year. So I'm also one of the early members of Hay Council, so I've had the privilege of watching Brian grow this group over the last year, and it's supported me in my growth. And so I'm excited to be able to do these things on Tuesday and hopefully help you guys grow in your practices as well. I know we've only got 45 minutes, and I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for conversation. So I'm excited to jump right into today's topic. Now, last week, you guys probably saw in Slack, we ran a topic poll to ask the community to vote on what should today's topic be. So after we tallied up the votes, as Brian mentioned, ChatGPT was a big focus of those votes. There are other few that were close in comparison, but ChatGPT Teams really seemed to be something that everybody was interested in. So that's what we're going to focus on today. But I don't want you to feel like you can't ask general questions about artificial intelligence or other tools. I want this to be an interactive conversation, so don't hesitate to jump in. I am a bit of a fast talker, so if I'm going too fast at any point, just let me know. Happy to slow down and then circle back on a topic. I am hearing a little bit of feedback, so if everybody could just put their lines on mute unless you've got a question, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. All right, so let's start. Let's start by, I want to set the stage a little bit. Let's look at some interesting Hay Council internal data from last year. In 2024, Brian and team gathered some data from Hay Council members regarding technology usage from the community, and the results are highlighted in this, and they point why I believe it was important to start Tech Tuesday for Hay Council. So if you're looking at this chart on the screen here, you can see at the client intake stage, more than half of the respondents reported that they're not using any type of client intake tools. And then if you go down to executive assistants or operational assistants, almost 91% aren't looking to hire at all. So that means that either individually as attorneys or small firms, we're taking that work on ourselves in addition to trying to grow our practice, in addition to trying to learn new areas of practice, and then in addition to all the requirements that come with the different types of clients that you have. And so what that told me is that there's a real opportunity just within this community for us to, one, lean on each other to be able to improve our practices, but two, lift up these technology pieces that do make a difference. And that's really what I want the focus of these Tech Tuesdays to be. How can we practically make a difference to this community, to attorneys in this group or legal professionals in this group with the tools? And so that's why your feedback is so important here. And that's why I think every week we'll try to look at polls to figure out what's the best topic. So looking a little bit farther into this information, one thing that's clear, though, is this group isn't afraid to try to use new tools, right? So if you look at just general artificial intelligence tools that the group is using, ChatGPT was the highest at 32%. We had Claude, we had Perplexity, we had Gemini, and then we had some few outliers out here as well. So what that tells me is while the AI adoption is clearly growing in the group, and based on my experiences with a pretty forward-thinking group of attorneys, Many members of our community, even though they know there's tools out there that can help them, they're not using them for their day-to-day tasks and things that are eating up a large portion of their workday. And so my natural question is why, right? Just out of curiosity, what is it that's holding us back? And through my experience over the last year, I've seen, from a couple of different perspectives, both in-house legal, law firms, and then legal tech companies. What are the different things that prevent people from taking that step and adopting a tool or being willing to experiment a little bit? And so I want to try to address some of those roadblocks before we look at the tool specifically. And the biggest one being, of course, what is the data privacy and security concerns that you need to be worried about? You've probably seen a million articles about DeepSeek and all the privacy and data concerns that are there. We're going to zoom back in to tools that you could really use today. I think the DeepSeek conversation is fascinating, but what you're going to see up here on the screen now is a chart that breaks it down for the tools that are out there that would be available for you to go sign up for today and start using. The first chart here is going to be OpenAI, and I will circulate this chart after, but it also has it for Microsoft Copilot. It also has it for Perplexity. And it also has it for Claude through Anthropic and Gemini as well. And what this chart does is it really does a great job. It's put together by GAI Insights, but it does a fantastic job of giving you a visual representation of what the tools offer and how they compare to each other. And what I love about it is it goes all the way down into the data security and privacy concerns and down into some of the legal questions that come up. So I really like this chart as a starting place when I'm meeting with any of my clients to say, okay, let's talk about the tools that are out there and let's talk about the risk appetite that you have for use. Everybody's practice is going to have a little bit different risk appetite. For example, now with the type of clients that I'm taking on, I have much less concerns about the data that I'm ingesting to help them, like with their AI strategy, for example. But I have way more concerns if I'm connecting to their database or if I'm getting access to their client documents and trying to utilize those with a tool, right? So there's different levels of risk appetite that I've got to be concerned about there. Versus if you are in a medical malpractice or you're in a fraud or blue collar crime type of practice, you're going to have a lot of sensitive information in your system, in your office, and living on your database. And so your risk appetite is going to be very different depending on what type of tool you're trying to use. So quickly, we're going to look at the OpenAI risk with each of these tools, because that's something I want to be clear about. No matter which of these tools you're using, if you are using a closed model tool, meaning somebody else is housing the data and has a server, there is a level of risk associated with using that. That's true of Clio. And using Clio now, you have a level of risk using that case management system. Net documents, any of those all have a level of risk. It's just how comfortable have you got with it? And what I really want to focus on with this chart is the levels of risk you could be comfortable with. So for example, if we're looking at the personal use section and we were talking about ChatGPT free, the free version of ChatGPT today has a lot of capabilities. If you look down here at the productivity features, you can see largely it has some of, if not all of the same capabilities of the paid for subscription services. The difference being, because it is free, of course, they have access to all of the data and information that you're putting into that, right? So for our purposes, we're not going to spend any time focusing on the free, but I want to point out that there's a lot of services that are out there that are like this, even outside of ChatGPT, where it seems like a really cool tool. It could be very useful in your practice, but you've got to be cognizant of the fact that if you're not paying for it and you're not seeing some level of security being guaranteed, that they're absorbing all of that information, right? So in summary, if you want to risk using the free models in your personal life or to have a little bit of fun, there's a ton of cool things that you can do with this. But for legal purposes, you're not even considering this column or any free columns for most tools, right? What you're really asking is there anything at the paid subscription level that could be useful? And so we're going to zoom in specifically on ChatGPT Teams and Enterprises here, right? So this is going to be the far to the right. And just quickly, I want to point out a few differences between the two, right? One, for ChatGPT Teams, it's designed for a small to medium-sized law firm. So we're talking, do you have 2 team members or more? So it's perfect for a firm like mine, and I think for a lot of firms that are part of the Hay Council community, this would be a good setup for different use cases. If you need something bigger, if you're going to have more teams and you need a little bit more enterprise grade level security, you've got the ChatGPT Enterprise subscription. You can see the differences in prices here. It's about double the price when you go to the enterprise level per seat on the monthly basis. So in my experience, most of the solo and small firms don't find a use for enterprise unless there's just some type of risk appetite that they're not willing to accept at the teams level. And I've got clients that have been on both sides of that. Zooming down a little bit farther, when you're talking about key features, the big difference in key features between these two is with the enterprise, you're going to have unlimited, and you may get access to new features before others do. But outside of that, the teams and the enterprises, from a feature standpoint, share the same tools, right? If you look here at the productivity features, they can both summarize and analyze text. They both can do web searches. You can use both of them to create and debug code. You can use it to generate images, and it can save information and act as almost a RAG system, a retrieval augmented generation. So basically your own little setup of a knowledge base that you can build here. All of those features are in both of these. So then the question is, which of these is more beneficial to your risk appetite? And that's where I really like this chart. As we zoom down here in the data security and privacy section, it gives one of the best breakdowns of the different levels of risk appetite that you're dealing with. So if we are in the teams or we are in the enterprise section, we're talking about these two columns here. You can see that overall, you get a couple of guarantees. There's company-specific guardrails that you're able to apply. We're talking about ability to control user management. We're talking ability to control what GPTs users can utilize and the ability to go back and look over conversations and errors that come up. But we're also talking about a commitment from OpenAI that they're not going to use your data for training on their models. They're also got SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, data privacy controls, and a few other features. These are all the important features that make these tools usable in a legal practice. But I can't stress enough that just because these are paid subscriptions doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're good to go, right? And here's why. All over the page, all over OpenAI's page, they talk about their enterprise privacy level, and they give you their commitments that you're going to own all of your data, that you have complete control of it, and they've got state-of-the-art security to be able to protect it. But as you guys probably know by now, just by watching the news, that doesn't mean that your data cannot be exposed. And in particular, there's two levels of risk, and they highlight them themselves in their frequently asked questions. One, when they're training, they say they do not train on it unless you have explicitly opted in to share your data with them. One of the tricky features that we've seen with OpenAI rolling out these services is that by default, when your settings are set up, that opt-in button will be selected and you have to go in and manually deselect that to start. So they do not train by default, but they do mark the consent box by default within those settings. Once you take that out, you're not allowing them to train on your data, and that's true for both teams and enterprises. So the question of am I worried about OpenAI taking my data and training their model on it is not one that has a lot of risk to it these days. But where I see law firms miss the boat a little bit is on the risk to exposure of their data to third parties, right? And that really comes up in two places. Obviously, exposure of any type of sensitive data that could be detrimental to their client, or exposing it could be illegal or something like that. But also exposing that data for attorney confidentiality purposes, right? We all know the third party can eliminate that attorney-client confidentiality that you have in those communications. And this is not a unique issue, right? We've used cloud servicers in the legal space for a while now, not as long as most businesses, but for a while now. And we all deal with third-party providers. It's just getting comfortable with those third-party providers. It's taken a while for people to get comfortable with cloud providers to say, okay, we're okay with hosting that data. And even then, a lot of firms still have policies where there's certain types of data, particularly at IP firms or criminal firms, that they're just not going to host it on the cloud for those purposes, right? They're going to take that sensitive data and segregate it off and put it in some type of local server or database that they feel more protected. And the reason that is important, guys, when you're thinking about these tools, is just because they're not training on your data doesn't mean it can't be exposed to a third party. Like I said, they will tell you that in their own frequently asked questions. They can access these conversations for limited purposes through authorized employees. The most common is to debug issues that happen with the system. They may need access to that conversation or to that log to be able to see why the system didn't work. And that could, if your client's information in there, potentially expose it to a third party. So this is the reason I tell you this is not to say don't use ChatGPTs. The reason I tell you this is you've got to start to think about how can I create a divide between things I can use ChatGPT teams for my firm and things I would not use it for. Because there are good use cases for ChatGPT, some where it's the best or better than anything else on the market. But there are other use cases where it doesn't make sense to ever use ChatGPT, or there are other things on the market that it would make way more sense to use, and there's no reason to consider ChatGPT there, right? So before we jump into the tool and really get into using it, the 5 things, I don't care what tool you're using, these are the 5 things that you shouldn't be uploading, period, when you're working with any of these tools, right? I'm just going to go through these quickly. Confidential details, right? So think client, business, family matters, any private information, wills, deeds, insurance policies, pictures or videos of anything that might have that information. These models are multimodal, so they can look at pictures and video and be able to extract that information out. Personally identifiable information. So think addresses, phone numbers, account numbers, credit cards, bank accounts, birth records, driver's license. Any of that information gets loaded even into your custom GPTs. It could potentially be exposed to a third party, and there's just no reason to be uploading that information into the system. Proprietary or business critical data. So think about unreleased product information, pricing strategies, financial forecasts, any of that stuff that businesses use for competitive advantages or to manage their risk. Obviously, you don't want to be exposing that data. You already take action to protect that data within the company. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to then use a tool to expose it outside of the company. And so that we tell our clients you should be looking for these, and these things should be in your AI policies for your firm. Sensitive materials, one that's coming up a lot, and we're seeing it now, particularly with all of the recording services for meetings, call recordings, meeting summaries, internal memos, Slack messages, or business or personal information that you just wouldn't usually share with the public. All of that becomes exposed if you're uploading that information or if you're giving tools access to that information. And last but not least, data protected by applicable laws, right? So copyrights, patents, designs, illegally obtained data, financial data, or even government data. All of that's going to have certain legal protections in place. Uploading it to any type of tool, I don't care how secure, without explicit waivers of liability is just risky, period. So those are the types of things I wouldn't ever, as a firm, be uploading in there. Instead, we want to be focusing on the things that are going to be beneficial. So let's flip over my other tool. All right. So over the last year of working with solo, small, and mid-sized firms, I've been experimenting with ChatGPT, and I've discovered that if you're looking for immediate benefits within your firm, you're usually best off targeting well-defined, repeatable tasks that fall either into one or 2 categories. The business of law. So when I think about the business law, I'm talking about like client intake research, conflicts checks, case management, accounting, not where you're applying a legal analysis, but the things you still got to do to make the wheels turn and keep everything moving. And then the other category being the practice of law. So there we're talking about legal analysis, research, drafting documents, court appearances, client communication, things like that. So when you're talking about repeatable tasks, we are looking for those tasks where we can optimize efficiency, right? Where we can create scalability, since we're one or only a few people, but we need to do more. We're looking for scalability, but also so we don't compromise quality. And so when I'm going through that with firms, I usually look at, first and foremost, what are those core abilities that ChatGPT offers, and how does that match how does that match with their potential pain points or use cases that they need? What you're seeing here on the screen is a custom GPT that I built. Excuse me. And Craig is my client research assistant. So basically, anytime I get a request in from the client that comes from my website or from an email or something from LinkedIn, there's a certain amount of information that I gather. And when I bring that information and drop it into Craig and ask him to perform his initial report for new clients, he's designed to go through and, based off of publicly available information, extract that information from the internet, from any documents that I upload, and then input it into a report in a format that I can then easily load into my case management system. I use a Notion tool to be able to manage my cases, right? So all of that are steps that I used to do manually. I used to, every time I got an email in, I'd go get that information. I'd have to take that information, go through it, get all the information out, organize it, and then bring it over and then put it into a report and go to the internet and start doing my searches and looking for all the information that I needed or felt I needed in order to be able to say, okay, I've investigated this client enough. This is a matter that I think I can handle, or this is something that I'm not interested in, and here's the red flags and why. And so what I want to show you today is how I built him, how he works, and I want you to be thinking about this as a concept in general for your firm. What are those repeatable tasks that you're doing every day or every week that you would like to hand off, but you just haven't been able to? And you're going to be thinking about it in the same framework that I use to build something like Craig, right? So let's look at Craig on the inside. Within ChatGPT teams, you have the ability to create custom GPTs. And what that means is you essentially can do three things. You have three levers that you can control to to be able to control what that GPT is going to do and try to get it to the output that you're looking for. First, you've got a set of custom instructions. So here you can see I've built in a set of custom instructions that I've developed over time, working with this tool to get it to the output that I wanted. I've got a set of knowledge for it. So just like with, if you've read about a RAG setup, a retrieval augmented generation setup where it can reference your own documents, custom GPTs have that built in. So if you upload a document into it, it's embedding it into a database for you, and you can use that as now a grounding knowledge base for your GPT. And then last, you've got your tools, right? So here you've got a couple different capabilities you can assign to it: web search, Canvas, encode interpreter, and data analysis. These are just built in. These, if you understand how to build these things and you get it set up correctly, these tools automatically come. But in addition to that, there's this, you'll see down here, this little actions button. And this is where you can create custom actions, code your own actions, and then hook them up to the GPT and give it additional functionalities. And this is really where you see firms or attorneys take a tool like this from being a standard tool that can be really useful to being completely customized to the use cases. So this is a good example of what I do a lot for my clients. I'll help them understand how to use themes. I'll get them set up. We'll get it to where their prompt is working the way it wants. And then we'll start to say, okay, what are the custom actions that you want to create? And then we can go through and start to create those, and we'll code those out and add them into the system. That is essentially what you need to be able to create a custom GPT to do a function. So the setup process isn't typically that hard. It's the iterative process that is both, I think, the fun part and the time-consuming part. And so I have some clients that they iterate with me, and I will work with them until we get to the stage they want. And I have others that say, please just get it to this output, and then once you're there, have me come in and test it at that point. Either of those are options, and that's the thing I want you guys to take away from this. If you're willing to put in the time, or if you're willing to engage somebody to help you, either of these are options. You could apply something like this to your practice today. It even has a function in there where you can do it through a chat function. So natural language conversation, tell it what you're trying to do, and it will go in and configure this for you, put the information in there. I will tell you, here's my experience when people try to do it themselves, and I tell you this so you go into it prepared. You're probably going to spend about 10 hours before you get to I think the final output that you're going to look for as you're going back and forth. You're going to put a little bit of time in it. You're going to get it to do 70, 80% of what you do. It's going to be that last 20% that you're really going to feel like you're struggling with. And it's going to take pushing through that to get it over the hump to where you want it to be. It's going to take being willing every time an email comes in to go, okay, let me try this process again and see if it's going to work or not. And I tell you that because I think so often people get turned off of these tools because they don't immediately provide the results that they're expecting. I think it's a misunderstanding of these tools that they're intended to be perfect. I don't think they are at all. In fact, they're predictive machines, so they're never going to be perfect, at least not in the structure or format that they're in today. Instead, if you think about it like an assistant, and the way I try to think about it every time I'm using it is, how much time am I saving in this step? How long would I have done this before? Because like you guys, I'm doing all of the work here for the firm, right? So every time I find a tool that saves me 10 or 15 minutes, and then I can scale that over a week or 2 weeks, that's a huge difference for me. And it adds up really, really quickly. But you won't get there if you aren't willing to put the time in or bring somebody in to help you do it. Either of those are great options. So once you've done that, what does that mean? Let me show you here real quickly. When I run for A, what happens? Brian, I'm using Hey Council as a guinea pig here today, just FYI. So in preparation for this, I pulled down Hey Council's terms of use, privacy policy, code of conduct. And this is the typical message that I would have prompted to my GPT once a new referral came in. So here I'm saying, hey, they've reached out. They want us to help update their terms of use, privacy policy, code of conduct. I need to do some investigating on this client to see who they are. And so once I run Craig, he's grounded to first his knowledge. So he's going to go look at his knowledge base and look at the template that I'm expecting. And then two, he's going to use the information and the instructions to go out and gather the information that I've told him to gather here. So we'll let him just finish out here real quickly. All right. So looking at this, I created, let me show you. In the knowledge base, the template that you saw that he was built with, this is what that template looks like, right? So this is a simple formatting template I gave it. This is what I'm expecting it to come out and look like with the information populated. I want to show you that so you can see how giving it the proper instructions and the right prompting, you can get the outputs using the templates that you're expecting. So here, you can see we're using that template. Starts with a summary table, giving me the high level, gives me my executive summary, corporate background, all the information being filled in as we go. But what I love about these tools, and what I don't think attorneys are taking enough advantage of, are the iterative functions of it, right? So I've asked it this initial query, and I think it did a pretty good job of gathering information about Hey Council, right? I can see the URLs it's used here, where it's getting its information from, but maybe I want some more detailed information. With some guidance, you can get back pieces that you're missing or get additional sources. And one of the functions that I love about what's built into it now is the ability to see these sources, right? Just by hovering them over, I can get to them, be able to access them. I can watch videos built in with it. And all of these tools and functions are right here. You can be doing this just within Teams, or you can embed this within your own platform. If you're working on it for your website, or you have your own case management system, you have the possibility of embedding these functions into those as well. All right, I think this has done a pretty good job of gathering the. Oh, no question.
Does that supplemental information that you ask go into your templated report?
That's a great question. So I'm going to ask it to go ahead and do that. And I want it to do it in a way that I can interact with it too now. And so one of the new functions that you can use in Teams is called Canvas. And that's what you're seeing here. On the right side, you are seeing an interactive, essentially Word document where the GPT is filling out the information and now incorporating this additional information that I asked for. But I can also, once it's done completing it, go in and directly interact with it. So I can give it directions on a specific section. I can tell it, I want to change the tone here. I want to change the length of this explanation, and all of that functionality is happening within this tool. And that's where I am seeing the biggest changes, particularly with tools that are based off of these proprietary models, right? So we are starting to see user experiences that make the functionality and efficiency more beneficial than it was before for law firms, right? So if you could just use the chat function before, there was a level of beneficiality to it, right? but you were still copying and pasting a lot. You were still having to jump back and forth between systems. They're slowly, from my point of view, they're slowly trying to close those gaps, right? So as you can see here, it's gone in. If I go back down here to the media coverage, you can see it's now incorporated some of that additional information and links to the videos from there and rewritten the report down through here. But you can also see, let's say, for example, I want to edit this section, right? You now have the functionality to just go in and directly ask it to change something right there. So let's just say, maybe I want to add some information in there about how many members we have in the summary, right? You see on the chat on the left side, my question is going to the GPT, but it's focused now directly on this highlighted portion because that's the part I asked it about. So when it goes back to edit, it's only going to edit those portions and it's going to show me those edits happening here. We can see, great example of that's not right. I don't think so, Brian. Do we have 1,500 members today?
I wish.
That would be great.
I wonder where it got that number from, though.
I should double check those numbers. But I want you guys to pull from this the functionality that you're seeing, right? So take out of it that you're just doing client intake. Think about trying to digest an initial set of client information where you can pull out and anonymize the data, but then feed it into a process that you're sitting down and doing every single day. I see this a lot with discovery, right? Especially discovery requests and depositions. I've got it set up now where I've got a GPT that once I've anonymized the documents, I can load it through and it can very, very well pull out information from the deposition testimony and summarize it. And that's something that I built. And there's several tools on the market that can help with that. The point being, I want you guys to see this functionality and start thinking about what are the things that you're having to do every day that are eating up your time that you can start to pick away at, right? Because the tools are there to do it. And this setup right here, a team setup is on average about $30 a month. You're going to need 2 team members. I am a one team firm, but I use 2 team members. I have one that is for my daily use with what I'm working on, and then I have one that's assigned to if I have a client or a team member that's coming in and they need access to it, they're able to work through that. And that's a service that I'm able to offer them. And so for $60 a month, I get so much functionality out of it that it's saving me hours every week to be able to do things. And obviously not just in these areas, right? I mean, you guys see me post on LinkedIn a lot. I write all of my content, but to do all the research every day, I've had to write structured programs to be able to do that. Just to give you guys a quick idea, right? One of the orchestration tools that I use is called N8N. That's what you're looking at here. This one here is for my emails. Every Outlook email that comes in goes through an analysis on its own that includes an OpenAI function where it's going to analyze the content of that email, categorize it, and then put it in a priority setup for you, right? And these tools are out there, open source and available for you to use today. This one that you're looking at right here is a free open source tool. You can pay for a subscription for additional features, but if you need help ingesting your Slack messages, those are out there. You just start to think about things like ChatGPT as functional tools that you can apply at different places, right? And over time, they're getting more and more integrated. Yeah.
One quick question. How do you reconcile sort of like the warnings that you provided in the beginning of this presentation with running your emails through Outlook? Are you not concerned about sort of the confidentiality stuff that you mentioned in the beginning?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the nice things and the reason I've moved into these orchestration tools is you have control over what agents or models you're using here. So here you can see I've selected to use the OpenAI model. That's just because I've gone through and created guardrails for this email inbox, but I can use local models. So one of the biggest things that I'm doing across the board for my practice, my firms, is looking to move as much as I can to local models that we can drive. And this is really where, if you guys have heard the DeepSeek conversation, this is where that becomes important, right? We're getting to a point where there are local models that you can run on a consumer grade laptop. So the laptop I'm working on right now it's 3 years old. It's an M1 8 gigabyte RAM MacBook Air. right? So basic consumer laptop that you could have bought at that time. We are not that far away from being able to run a deep seeking reasoning model on that. And so what that means is there's a whole lot of local models that can do a lot of these functions today. So to avoid those concerns, Brian, looking to move local. And you can do that one of two ways. You can have somebody that helps you set that up. There's some really easy functions to be able to run models locally on your computer. It's something I'm happy to help anybody with, it's something I do day in and day out right now. Or you can look for services that give you access to that, and you get those privacy and security guarantees in it with it, right? So one that I think of is GCAI. I don't think there is a better one out there from a privacy and security standpoint, from what I've seen, what they're willing to commit to and what they're telling you they're doing with your instances. Obviously, GCAI has a really, really good niche area that it's functioning in. What I want you to be able to see is you have abilities to start using other functions, right? So something like this, you can integrate it with Slack, you can integrate it with any of your databases, you can integrate it with your emails, your websites, Notion. All of that integration is there, and the security is then built into each of those layers, right? So if you are already comfortable with using Outlook for security purposes in email, then as long as you're not pushing it to an outside model, you can build that structure and get there. And that's honestly where I think the legal space is headed. I think you're going to get where, if you want to know that you have control of your data, you don't want to be concerned about the risk of exposure, you're looking for opportunities to start to deploy these models on your computer yourself, but in a UI experience that makes it easy to do that. So you're not having to do all the things in the background. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Julia also answered or asked a question in the chat, which is more around the data accuracy concerns. Obviously, we have an example right in front of us where the first time around it got the answer wrong with how many members there are within our community. And then it got right after we asked it again. We're closer to right. It pulled from a real source. I'm guessing that's our website, which says 170 members as of August. But I'm curious, yeah, are there tricks to either prompting or evaluating responses to like help you know where to poke and prod a little bit more to get correct answers, or at least prompt to get more answers that are rooted in reality or real sources? This is obviously the question of all questions when it comes to like AI or generate or whatever Gen AI like accuracy, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think one, it's a great question to focus on. Are there tricks? Yes, there are absolutely tricks that you can utilize within the prompting. There's tricks as you start to do things like this, where you're chaining things together. There are tricks that you can use within this to be able to essentially put guardrails and protect the information as it goes, to make sure that it only has certain options to do certain things, so that you get more accurate answers. But the truth is, I think this is true of any output from any tool. You are getting an 80 to 90% output every single time, which means every single time you need to go back and validate the information that you're looking at. The refrain I hear most of the time about that is, well, that just was like doing the work twice. And it's one of those that I understand the instinct, but I don't always see how it pans out with the result. And what I mean by that is, I try to think about it, if I was just doing it myself and I was going to sit down and do it, or if I was going to hand it off to an assistant or a young attorney to do, what was my expectation when they go do it? All right. And I sit down myself and I think about the amount of time I spend, how many times I start something, I restart something, I erase what I did and start over. And I realize I'm not holding myself to the expectation to be perfect every single time I sit down and work on work, but I am expecting the output to be perfect when I'm done with it. So the way you combat the issues is you have the human in the loop. This is an interactive conversation. So, and that's why I love features like this Canvas feature. It's not just giving me this output and saying, okay, here you go. This does everything you need it to do. It's giving me that initial information based off of my instructions. And then I can very quickly go back and see, okay, this isn't what I wanted it to be. I need to do something, give it some level of prompting or some level of editing, just like I would have to do if I was doing it myself, to get it to the level it needs to be. What's different is that editing process isn't me doing it by myself. And it isn't me having to go do all the physical work to gather the data and components and need to do it by myself. You have a tool to help you do that. And that's really where the efficiencies come. I do not think today it's wise for any attorneys to say, okay, I can step out of this process completely. There's nothing about this that I need to look at this and just go on to the client, or it can just move on to the next step. I think there always needs to be a human in the loop. The question is how much and at what point? And that's really what you can change with today's tool. If you want to look at experimenting with the least amount of risk possible, that's the way I've encouraged my clients to approach it. And I'm seeing a lot of success, guys. And one of the things that's really fascinating too is how quickly the successes start to snowball on top of each other. So once you start to get those hooks in and you feel that change and you start to look for other opportunities, then that new model comes out or that new capability comes out, and you're already set up to be used to iterating and just incorporating that in, right? Because none of this is static. It's the truth. I mean, we're going through this today and its capabilities, and the O3 model could come out tomorrow, and that could completely change what these tools are capable of overnight. But the only way to be ready for that is if you're already using them and incorporating them in your process. And I think about it like with Word, right? If Word had all these cool new features and stuff, but you never got used to how to use Word from the beginning, or in this case, I'm sure there's some of us that here that will admit there's still features that you never figured out, then you're not going to find those new cool features very beneficial, and you're not going to adopt them into your process because you're still trying to figure out the other features, right? I think if you are thinking about these tools as iterative tools and you're looking for ways to make your process more efficient and take some of the day-to-day task workload off yourself, then you're doing it in a safe way. And so things like numbers being wrong are going to be things that you were going to be responsible for catching anyway. The biggest area I worry about it with is obviously with pleadings with courts. That's where we see the most errors with people. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, that goes back to what was your process for validating your sources. If there's any source they're not validating for any filing, I don't care what tool you're using, you're already making a mistake there, right? And I think if you largely look at those examples, even all the way down to I think that expert witness that got busted for using ChatGPT, all of those are examples of people choosing not to do their responsibility, not of the tools doing the responsibility incorrectly, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Christian. This is Julia. I have kind of a follow-up question. Is there any way to do a prompt that basically tells the program it's okay to have a non-answer? Because some of the things that I'm seeing is like the hallucinations are coming when it's going to answer your question no matter what. Whereas a human might come to you, like let's say a law clerk might come to you and say, I did this research and there are no cases dealing with this issue. Is there a prompt you can do that kind of replicates and says, don't, it's okay to say there is no information out there?
Yeah, great question. And so, yeah, I pulled up here. So these are the instructions that my GPT has built into it. And I just want to quickly highlight something that I think is kind of right on point with what you're talking about. Here, I've got a set of initial, just overall instructions for it. And I've done my best to try to tell it, do not speculate, right? If the information is not available, I just wanted to indicate that it's not. And I think a little bit, if I remember this prompt correctly, I ask it to ensure all its facts are, checked. And if no relevant information is found, please clearly state it. So I show you that to say you can absolutely put it in the instructions and it will help steer it. But what's important to understand about these tools, right, is they are predictive text. And so when you are steering it, you're still not able to guarantee that it's always going to go in the perfect direction, right? And so like in this situation, I would want it to come back and say, no, it didn't find the information about the count instead of making up 1,500, or come back and say it found conflicting information, but it didn't here. And so what that tells me is a couple of things. There's something about the way I'm steering it that's not getting it to where it needs to be. And these instructions aren't just being followed blindly. They're just influencing how it's responding. So it's not like when you give an assistant a rule and they can say, okay, red means stop. We can tell ChatGPT all day long that red means stop, but there is a statistical probability that sometimes it's not going to recognize that. It's going to make a mistake. And that's really where, when you start to reach that level of task, right? So you're starting to say, okay, what aren't just daily repeatable tasks I can take off, but what are things where I have to chain tasks together, right? So I've got to gather the information and get it into a format, and then I got to validate numbers, and then I've got to sign off before I file it with the court. That's really where I start to see tools like this come into play, because then you're not just relying on the model. So if you're looking at this whole process, right, the only part of the process that the model is doing is this. Everything else is being handled by tools that we already work with. This is Microsoft telling me that an email came in and providing the information. This is just code that I've written that transfers that into a more usable format. This is a set of variables that I've assigned to it that say, here, this is the information I want you to pull out of that email for this use. So you start to see these are all the guardrails or steps you take to protect that process and make it do the things that you want. And you go from just using a custom GPT that has a lot of functionality to try to do everything to, hey, let me do things that I know work correctly. Let me only use the GPT where I need to, and then let me get back to the other tools from there. And that's where I think when you're talking about problems like that, that's the solution that you're looking for. You want the power of the engine, but you want the structure and protection of all the other applications. Other questions? These are great questions, guys.
Yes. Were there any of the models where you could import confidential information, PHI? Does that exist?
There are none that are running on a third-party service. So what I typically do for my clients that need to use the power of a model but need to run either proprietary data through it or just stuff that they don't want going out to a server, you would need essentially the hardware to house the data. I'm sorry, the hardware to house the model. And then I would set up an infrastructure for you to be able to run it. So there's certain programs where you can go through and be able to pick any model that you want. And so that's what I spend a lot of time doing now is if a law firm says, okay, I need a model that can summarize these health records, for example, but I can't run these health records through anything that's going to be exposed. We got HIPAA compliance concerns. Okay, we will set up a instance on your computer. We'll find the best local model that you can use that gets you the output that you want. And then we create essentially a process like this for you, where instead of it being the OpenAI model here, it's your local model, so that you can still use Microsoft and Slack, Teams, all those other Adobe, all those other functionalities, but then get the use of your tool and get where you're not having to do it's happening in the back. So just to show you real quickly, this model, what you're seeing right here, that happens in the background every time I get an email. So it just went through that workflow and completed all of those steps for me. And essentially what happens is it categorizes the email, it summarizes it, it triggers a few other actions within my system, and then it's going to go back to Outlook and put it in a certain folder with a certain category and a certain tab. And that used to be a function I did every time an email came in, and just out of habit, I immediately opened it, I categorized it, I put a tag on it, and I pushed it to a folder, and then I might mark it to read later or something. And I probably 100 emails a day doing that. And this is something that just automatically happens in the background. If you extrapolate that out for everything, if you're talking about client communications, if you're talking about LinkedIn posts, if you're talking about drafting with templates that, standard languages over and over and over again, just because another event happens, those capabilities are here, and you can use those. If you need to be local, I would highly suggest finding somebody to help you set that up. There are some great tutorials out there to walk you through it, and I'm happy to talk you through it. But what I usually find is if you're going local, you're just going to want to have a little bit more guidance to get there. Other questions?
I think Dina has her hand raised. I have one just quick follow-up if you can answer it in 15 seconds. But when you mentioned GCAI, I thought maybe that was a tool that you could use confidential information inside. Am I wrong there, or is that just a risk decision?
It's a risk decision. So I have not encouraged any of my clients to upload any information that's not anonymized, at least,
Mhm.
to any platform, and simply because we don't know what's going to happen with the copyright law lawsuits, and we don't know
Okay.
what the indemnity liability is going to be there. With that said, if there was a platform my client was telling me, "Hey, I'm going to use and upload information to," GCAI would be one of the ones that I would be the least worried about because of the way they have structured their instances and separated their data, but also my understanding is they're one of the organizations that has got a waiver from OpenAI for any viewing by their employees for even error purposes. So that means there is no risk of that third party exposure based off of that waiver. And,
Okay.
you know,
Great. Thank you.
if I'm wrong about that, I'll have Cecilia with her to make sure. But that's my understanding. That's how that works. And so I always tell my clients, if you're looking for a tool, if you just absolutely have to do it, if you're not going local, something like that is what you're looking at.
Great. Dina?
Yeah. So I guess I have one that's kind of a follow-up, and one that's separate now, just kind of going towards the way that you're going, Brian, about other tools. But the follow-up is, I guess, like, are you seeing this more for, you know, like firms with lots of people, or like, is this something that's actually realistic for a solo practice? Because it feels a little overwhelming, and to have to like pull everything into a private instance and get the setup feels like it also might be my practice in particular. But so that's one question. The second question is Marveri, which is obviously a tool that this group you know knows a lot about. So it seems like, based on kind of your recommendation, that that is a tool that you wouldn't recommend, because everything that's going in there is confidential information, because you're doing diligence on targets. So is that kind of where you think things shake out generally? Do you think that's overly conservative? Just your take on that.
Yeah, no, two great questions. Yes, so kind of tackling the first one. Go back. Give me just 1 second. I'm gonna show this. I am personally believe that one of the great benefits of these tools is that it creates a level playing field that didn't exist before for solo and small firms. And what I mean by that is there you have capabilities that only before would have been in some of the biggest firms, if at all. And now, even though those firms also have those capabilities, you can compete with them for different matters. And I really truly believe that. Most of my clients are solo and small firms. I have a few mid-sized firms that I work with, but most of them are solo and small firms. And where they're really finding the benefit is being able to pick up that work that is weighing them down every day. Being able to then go out and do more marketing, being able to then go out and do more client engagement, or avoid having to bring somebody on. That's another one that a lot of my clients are just scared to make a hiring decision right now, right? Both with the climate and the way the economy is. But two, they're doing this for the first time, and they don't want to take somebody else's livelihood on and be wrong, right? They don't want to fail and somebody else's livelihood be a part of that. And so these tools can mean that decision doesn't have to be either I hire somebody or I don't. You could start to look for opportunities to get you from that, hey, I'm overwhelmed, to, hey, I'm managing it, to, hey, I'm ready to train somebody and I've got the infrastructure so that if I bring somebody in, I know what they need to be doing, what they'll be working with, and where, and not just bring them in and just start handing things off. And I think I really believe that. I think it is something that can make a difference. I completely understand the feeling that it can be overwhelming. Sometimes it's easy. Let's see, I've been in this stuff since 2021. So it's easy to get lost in how much has happened during that time and how exciting it's been to me, but how overwhelming it can be to the group. I think the key to not being overwhelmed is, first and foremost, just being willing to experiment. Even if you're not doing it at work, if you put in just 10 hours of time of just trying to do different things, use it to try to create a recipe for something you want to cook at home. Have it help you learn a new topic that you want to learn. But once you put that time in and you've made that commitment, you start to see those capabilities, and it almost becomes second nature. You start to think, okay, well, I did this before. maybe it can help you with this. And that's where I think it can make a difference, particularly if you're not using a lot of technology in your practice today, right? So if you're just using Outlook, Excel, and Adobe to get through with most of your practice, you're missing out on a lot of potential functionalities from other tools that exist. And this is one of the best tools that kind of takes all of that and gives it to an assistant that you can talk to be able to work through some of that. The quick example, I know we're over time. I understand anybody that's got to go. I'm happy to stay and answer questions as long as you need me. But a quick example is with all this data that we were just looking at, if I was going to then try to put this into an Excel file with a prompt of 2 questions, I can get this moved into an Excel file and be ready to use it. That is a 30-minute process if I'm manually going to do it myself, right? And those are the types of things we don't think about because, one, you may not do it today, right? You may just not even think that's possible. I'm not going to put stuff in Excel. It's going to take me too long. But also, you didn't know those capabilities were there. I mean, I'd be curious to know how many people had seen the Canva functions in ChatGPT today, right? That level of interactive drafting, I would call it dynamic drafting. There's not a lot of tools that exist that have that, and there's not a lot of us that have worked with it. But as you start to get that experience, you can kind of see how the practice could be a little bit different. Regarding the investment that this community's made, I don't have any experience with that tool yet. So I saw the demo day, and that was my first exposure to that tool. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to dive in and get to a point where I felt like I could go in on the investment yet. So I will withhold any judgment there. My understanding is that it is a very secure platform from the information that I have, but I would definitely need to dig in, read the terms, and get out there and try it. I'd be curious to know what anybody's experience has been here. But there's definitely ways to create that where your risk appetite is, you're willing to work with a platform like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, and it's a broader one, and maybe I'm taking the caution from the beginning too broadly, but I do M&A, and almost everything, your list of things never to upload is basically all of the documents that I use every day. So that's where I'm kind of coming from of like, and saying it's overwhelming in the sense of, can I not use literally any tool? Does every single thing have to be local? And that for my practice feels overkill. So that's kind of where I was coming from on that, because it is directly, they say that they won't train on your data and they have like the other security features, but it's certainly the same risk of, hey, you're uploading this to third parties where third parties could access it, I think, for some of the same IT concerns you had mentioned.
Yeah, I think about those like most contract lifecycle management programs and others, right? There's a risk there. I don't think anybody will flat out say there's no risk. In fact, most of them, if you look at their limited liability clauses, that they're limiting liability because they know that there is a risk. But we've all gotten comfortable with those, right? So I would think about, like I said, I haven't been exposed to the tool, but I would think about it along those lines. So if have been comfortable in the past with working with a contract lifecycle management program or something similar, you're probably comfortable with how they're storing the data. The thing that changes is you do want to know what models are they using and how is your data being exposed to it, right? So like the GCAI example, if you know your models, if you know your data is being exposed to ChatGPT, but it's in a separate instance and they've got that waiver in place, that's a different analysis than if they tell you, oh yeah, we're using just our proprietary local model. Okay, well, tell me more about that model and how are you storing the data and where it is. Each model has its different level of risk. And that, to me, is how you evaluate all vendors, whichever you're using. And so that's where my focus would be. And my guess is that they've got it set up with that in mind because of the use cases. I mean, M&A is very common to have different technology platforms across the board. You've got to be able to upload that information. And it's just a matter of making sure that they've checked those boxes. And that's really, and it's such a hard message to deliver because I think it's important to raise the flag and make sure everybody sees the danger before you dive in head first. But it shouldn't prevent you from being willing to experiment. And that's the hard part is these tools are new, they're developing, they're constantly changing. And the vendors that are using them, even the ones that you sign up for, they're iterating and changing as well. They're swapping models in and out. They're doing different things. And so it's just making sure you have an understanding, at least enough of an understanding, even if you look at like what the ABA requirements are now. If you have enough of an understanding of your vendor to say, okay, I know that they're housing my data here and it's protected and this is what they've told me, and I know that this is the level of security I expected, then you're usually going to be okay with your use case.
Thanks, Christian.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Hey guys, well, this, like I said, this is just the first Tech Tuesday, and also I'm not going to be the only one presenting all the time. So I would encourage, if you are already using some tools, if you're excited about them, if you would like to talk about potentially showing the team how you're using them, reach out to me, reach out to Brian. Let's talk about it, because I want this to, continue to grow and be interactive. I will definitely have plenty of tools to show you guys every month, and happy to go through them. We'll look at doing polls again so we can get that feedback. And I just really appreciate you guys joining us, and hope to meet you all in person here, hopefully in 2025. Thanks, everybody.